Welcome to Dental Town's live town hall on the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is Tom Giacobbe. I'm the editorial director for Dental Town magazine, and I will serve as the moderator for today's event. Now a word about our panel. Our host today will be Dr. Howard Farran, the founder of Dental Town. We're joined by George Tysowsky, the Senior Vice President of Technology and Professional Relations at Ivoclar Vivadent. Also Chuck Cohen, the Managing Director at Benco Dental Company. John Balitis, the Chair of Labor and Employment at Jennings, Strouss, and Salmon. Art Wiederman, accountant who's a partner at HMWC, CPAs, and Business Advisors, as well as Dr. Rella Christensen, co-founder of the nonprofit Clinicians Report Foundation, and Dr. Gordon Christensen, the founder and chief executive officer of Practical Clinical Courses. The plan for today is I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Howard Farran in just a moment. He's going to call on each panelist to share some comments on their point of view during this unprecedented event. Then we will open the floor to questions, and I will present your questions to the panel on your behalf. We'll do our best to focus on what we can do now and how we can prepare for an uncertain future. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce our fearless leader and host for today's event, Dr. Howard Farran.
It is an honor to be here with my distinguished colleagues. We tried to find the smartest people we could find to come on the show, and we did it. And one of the reasons we're smart is because we're old. And so what I am most, what I'm thinking about the most is this is March 25th. We're just a May away from the dental school graduating class of COVID-19 2020, when 6,500 dentists are going to be entering the U.S. workforce, and they're probably thinking, oh my gosh, this is the worst time in the world to become a dentist, and I want to say they couldn't be more wrong. I've lived through 5 economic downturns. I graduated from high school in 1980. That was the worst I ever saw. Then I graduated from dental school in 87 in May, and Black Monday was October. I lived through the 2000 Y2K bubble, the 2008 Lehman's Day, and then so this is the 5th one. Jack Welch used to always say that the best way to become a business leader is a near-death experience. And Chuck, that's how Benco got started. Didn't your dad have a near-death experience with a hurricane named Agnes?
Yeah, so Howard, welcome, and I'm very flattered to be on a panel with such great, smart people. I'm like you, I'm going to learn a lot over the next 2 hours. So our business is family business. We were founded by my grandfather in 1930. In 1972, our little town was flooded out, and my father and his father had built a business with about 15 or 20 employees, and they were doing business in regional Pennsylvania, northeastern Pennsylvania, and a flood came through, and it was 12 feet high. He lost all the inventory, all of his trucks. He will tell you today, the best lesson from that was he didn't lose any of the people. Once he got the people back and once he rebuilt, the business was stronger than ever. And I think you'll hear that story from a lot of people who've been through crises.
When I heard that story the first time, I cried. I did. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. That's on a YouTube video. I know I posted it somewhere. Do you still have it?
We still do, and I'll send you a link to it so you can share it with your people. But it's really amazing. The lesson is, even if you have no insurance, even if you need to get help from the government, we are all in people businesses. If you can keep your people together, if you can reinvest in the future, you can make a success in the United States of America. And it's totally an inspiring story, and I will send you the link so you can share it.
And what you said is so true. I know yesterday everybody was talking about where some people were saying my grandma would rather catch COVID-19 and save the U.S. economy. And it's like, I don't see any 3-year-old kids running around that don't want to see their nana because of interest rates. So people first, that's so obvious. Arthur, it seems like everybody is very interested about this bill that Congress spent last night. We're $19 trillion in debt. We have $58 trillion of unfunded liabilities, but they went ahead and spent $2 trillion last night. Is that gonna get the monkey off everybody's back?
Well, Howard, first of all, thank you. It's an honor to be on this podcast with such a distinguished group of professionals. It's definitely going to help. There's a lot of good news in what we've been seeing. Our group, the Academy of Dental CPAs, have been blogging back and forth for a week now, dozens and dozens, and everybody's on top of it. Our president, Alan Schiff's been on the phone with the American Dental Association, getting all the latest updates. And yes, there is some really good news in this CARES Act, depending on what is finally passed, which we hope is going to pass in the next couple of days. There is a new 7A loan program that is being put out that is going to provide potentially 8 weeks of monies to pay employees for small businesses. There's $350 billion of funds in this almost $2 trillion bill that is basically set for small businesses. They are pulling out all of the stops. What they want is they want small businesses to keep people employed. So we don't know what's going to be in the final bill that's ultimately going to be signed by the president. It has to be voted on by the Senate. It has to be voted on by the House. Alan sent us an email that says that they're going to call the whole House potentially back into Washington to vote on this thing. It may be a couple days, but it is going to get done. And there is going to be relief for dentists, and we just have to wait and see what it is. The other thing, Howard, is that the banks, the Small Business Administration is not able to handle all of the tens of thousands of requests for loan assistance by themselves. So they are bringing in 3 of the biggest banks in the country to help, and all the SBA providers to help dole this money out. This is an urgent call that the government appears to be taking very, very seriously. So I do believe there will be good news in this bailout bill for dentists.
Well, we have 4 dentists in the U.S. House of Representatives. We have Paul Gosar, who I actually went to Creighton with when I was at Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska. I was on the 9th floor. He was on the 8th floor. And my favorite Paul Gosar story is one time I went to McDonald's at like 1 in the morning and got mugged. And when I came in, I was bleeding, and he ran out. He was the only guy. He ran straight out the door. All he wanted to do was catch the guy. I mean, he's a fearless man. He's a dentist. He's in Flagstaff. We got Mike Simpson, Drew Ferguson, the 4th, DMD, Brian Babin, DDS. Have you heard from any of those? Or when this is passed, are they going to come on to a show like this? I would love to have them all come on the show as 4 dentists to talk to not just the dentists who want to save their employees, because Chuck started it out perfectly. You know, after this COVID-19 wave is gone, our employees need someplace to come back to. So the number one concern is save the barn, so that we can all, when we all come back out of our house, we have some job to go to. And I would really like to hear 4 dentists who are in the U.S. House of Representatives talk to the 6,500 new kids who will be graduating in May, because they're scared. I'm not scared. I'm too old to be scared. You can't scare a man who has 4 kids and 6 grandkids. But I imagine they're scared at age 25. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would, and I think that would be a great idea. And I'm sure that they're thinking about the dentists across America who are nervous, are struggling, and are just unsure of where this is going. But I agree with you, Howard. The dental profession, I've been involved in it for 35 years, as many of the people have been. It's a fabulous profession. I'm so glad I devoted my career to dentists, and we are going to come out of this better. We absolutely are.
Well, I remember the last time I remember this virus is small compared to the HIV virus. And I mean, that killed 36 some million people. But when David Acker's patient, Kimberly Burgalis, went to the newspaper and said that she had indeed contracted it from the Centers for Disease Control, and they agreed that it was a very possibility, that had a forever David Acker effect on dentistry. It forced universal precautions that we had known about since, you know, the mid 80s, but dentists didn't want to wear gloves. They didn't want to wear masks. But it was Kimberly Burgalis going to the press that changed dentistry forever. And Rella, do you think we're going to have a COVID-19 David Acker effect with COVID-19? Do you think, what will be Kimberly Bergalis long-term effects of COVID-19 on dentistry. All for the
Yeah.
better, I might add. You know, what doesn't kill us makes us stronger.
I think there will be an effect. I think the number of our clinical facilities have been cut short. That they don't have the materials and the chemicals on hand that are really effective, although we've known what those are for over 30 years in our own lab. We've tested over 200 of the disinfectants and about 50 different brands of masks. We've known these things, but people have been not as interested, I'll say, as I think they will be in the future, and also having things on hand. And I believe that goes for funds, money, as well as products and materials and procedures. I think that we've been pretty casual about infection control. We think we do really well in dentistry, but we have a special problem in dentistry that most of the other professions in healthcare don't have, and that is aerosols. We know that all of our air-driven instruments, it isn't those instruments that make the aerosols that I'm worried about. It's the fact that the air that drives those instruments kicks up the patient's oral fluids. And those can be saliva, they can be blood, they can be biofilm, they can be trabecular fluid. The infected patient, any of those human protein fluids would carry most viruses, and certainly this particular one, it will. And so I think we're going to learn an awful lot in a short time. And honestly, I do believe we'll come out better prepared and perhaps a little more believing that we need to be careful.
Well,
So-
everybody's first impression of a dental office is that smell. I mean, it's just the smell. I mean, and if you are in a dental office, you don't think it smells, it's because you've lived there so long, you don't know the smell. But that little high-speed handpiece is a jet engine creating aerosols, and it's on the walls, the ceilings, it's everywhere, and it's that smell.
Right.
Do you think that this is COVID-19 is going to put downward pressures on high speeds and cavitrons, and will go to other means of removing decay, whether it be lasers or electric handpieces that don't have that jet engine effect on creating aerosols?
Well, Howard, those also create aerosols. You're thinking of the coolant water and the material that you see. What we're really talking about is what's kicked in out of the rotary motion and the activity of the instrument in the mouth. So all of those create aerosols. I think what we're going to do is they're going to appreciate our high velocity suction more. We actually, a period of years ago, leased a dental operatory in a very busy office. We went in and asked the doc, could we have this operatory for a period of months, and leased it right from the dentist, and tested a number of different air purifiers and different procedures using laser particle counters. And we learned a lot. We learned that most of the aerosols are about 36 inches from shoulder to shoulder in front of the face. We learned that.
Are you guys hearing Rella okay? Is the sound with Rella okay, or does it need to be higher?
It's a little muffled.
Yeah, Rella, your sound's a little muffled. Is there any?
My sound is muffled. I think I'm talking pretty loud, but maybe not close enough.
Louder. That was much better.
Is
that better? Okay.
Much better.
Okay. All right. Well, I was just saying that our best friend, we're going to create aerosols no matter what we do, because we use rotary instruments, we use power instruments. And I think most people, when they think of the aerosols, they generally think of the air coolant they can see. But And that's a problem, but it's not nearly the problem as kicking up the fluids from the patient's oral cavity itself. A number of different fluids, not just saliva. The high velocity suction was what I was trying to touch on, because if it's working properly, and if the dental assistant and the dentist have learned how to use it properly, we found in this special work that we set up right in a busy dental office, where we released one of the operatories right in the middle of the office, and then tested different air purifiers, different procedures. We learned that the high velocity suction, properly working, properly used, could actually take up more than 99% of the aerosols. And if we added an air purifier to that, we could get the aerosols per cubic foot down below an office, like an accountant's office and an attorney's office, and Georgia, an industry person's office. There are always aerosols, but we have more in dentistry. We have a lot more, and they're small.
You know, one of the most shocking experiences I had that was crazy is, you know, I'm in Phoenix, where they have Intel and Motorola and all that. And back in the day, way back in the 80s, you know, security wasn't as big of a deal as it was later. But I'll never forget visiting an Intel factory, and oh my God, if you wanted to go in, you had to go in a room, you had to take off your clothes, you had to shower, you had to put on an outfit, breathing, all that. And they had the air down to something like 1 particle per billion or something, because they could not have a chip be bad. And then my next visit was Chandler Memorial Hospital right across the street. And there you do. You pull up in your car and you got tennis shoes on. You walk through the parking lot. You go in the elevator, and all you have to do is wash your hands for 5 or 10 minutes. And then they're cutting people open and doing surgery. And I'm like, why is the Intel chip plant 1,000 times cleaner than where you have surgery done? And that's still, I mean, what do you think today the difference is between Intel's clean room manufacturing and your average ICU in a hospital in America? What would be the difference in infection control?
We're at a different level here. You're talking ICU. You're not talking an outpatient clinic like a dental office. You go into an ICU or OR in a hospital, and there should be negative air and air filtration in those environments. However, you may go into a patient room, or you may go into an outpatient office, then that becomes a whole different story there. So in our own microbiology labs, we definitely have pretty strict air filtration and negative air, because we work with pathogens and try not to get sick, working with the very organisms that we're using as test organisms. So it depends. There are many different levels, I would say. In the dental office, we have, in general, been casual about the air. And Howard, in all fairness, we mentioned that back about 25 years ago, and it created a really hostile feeling in dentistry, because OSHA regulations had just been placed upon the dental offices, and not long after that, HIPAA. And when we started showing what we had learned in the aerosol control work that we've done, the dentists were concerned that now NIOSH regulations would be imposed
another expert there.
On a dental office environment. And there is a whole organization called ASHRAE. I don't know what it stands for because I can't remember, but these are engineers that deal with environments in all types of buildings, particularly industrial buildings, and particularly like skyscrapers, because there does have to be air exchange, and everything can't be just.
And these are all the long-term changes that people don't appreciate, especially the young kids. Like, they don't realize that flying an airplane. Well, you know, SARS, this is SARS too. SARS One was, 15 years ago, severe acute respiratory syndrome. This is SARS-2 causing the COVID-19. But airplanes started changing their air. They don't recycle the air. They have it go outside. When I got out of dental school, people don't even believe me when I tell them this. It's so crazy. But my favorite dentist that I like to hang out with, who was I was 24, he was probably 80. His cuspidor was his ashtray. And there was 100 cigarette butts in that thing. And he had this white curly wig and he was in the Scottsdale Study Club. And I remember when it was you, Rella, I was so mad at you where you made me get rid of my cuspidor. But see, we've gone from the cuspidor as an ashtray to the cuspidor correctly to not. Customer, I mean, for all we know, Benco will be providing us with negative air machines that will be removing air. I mean, I can smell my way, but I want to switch gears completely real quick because there are still a lot of dentists open today that are flouting the system. Now, remember, I'm in Arizona, and it's the Florida of the West. Texas is pretty redneck. That's where 4 of my 6 grandchildren live. But I know personally lots of dentists who think this is a severe overreaction. And John, I know what makes them listen. Are they going to be liable if someone gets COVID-19 after what the government has, quote, recommended? They're saying things like, well, the ADA, they're not an authority. They're not the police. What happens if you're practicing dentistry today in Arizona or Texas, and we find out a month from now, like, remember the Vancouver Dental Convention? When Hinman called the shot that, nah, we're not going to risk it, a lot of people weren't, there were a lot of upset people. But now Hinman looks like a genius. And the Vancouver meeting, which they knew it was serious enough, they were asking all the experts, so they knew it was serious. So that the timing there. But what would you say to a dentist who's open today that maybe 6 weeks from now, some microbiologist is going to say, hey, these 4 people, they all saw you. That's your virus. Are they going to be legally liable?
Good questions, Howard, and thank you again to you and Tom for inviting me. Like everybody else, I'm very flattered and excited to be part of such a distinguished group. Your questions really sort of implicate 2 different areas. They implicate issues for workers, and then they implicate issues for patients. And on the worker side, I think it's fairly clear that if a worker ends up contracting this because they continue to come into the workspace and work, whether you require them to or they opt in, workers' compensation is going to cover an infection or anything else that results from it. So that's really a compensable industrial condition for workers in the event that happens. As far as patients go, you have to understand, we don't have a business lockdown here that covers dentistry or really medical offices generally yet, or we may not ever. And that means that the government has decided, at least for the time being, that businesses are allowed to be open, they're permitted to be open. And then patients who come into those businesses, whether it be a dental practice or an orthopedic practice where my spouse works, they are making that election knowing what's going on. So I don't think that clinics or dental practices or anybody in this industry really needs to be too concerned about lingering liability that that results from a patient experiencing this. I really don't. Besides, you have all sorts of traceability issues with it anyway, in terms of trying to determine whether the one particular patient of one particular dentist actually contracted this there as opposed to somewhere else. It would almost be virtually impossible to do, I would suppose. So I don't know that those really are significant factors right now.
Because you and I are both right here in Phoenix. I invited him over to my house today for this podcast, but due to social isolation, he said he wasn't going to do it. He's a letter by the law. But our governor just passed Arizona. He says here, I just posted, Governor Douglas A. Ducey, state of Arizona, executive order prohibiting the closure of essential services, and dentistry is an essential service for emergency. So is that the legal blanket that dentists have then?
Well, that certainly comes into play. I think just anecdotally, and I was reading this morning about this too, many of the mayors in the state are somewhat stunned by the extent to which Governor Ducey has designated essential businesses. If you look at the proclamation, for example, Chuck, from Pennsylvania's governor and the chart that came along with it, he deemed many, many fewer businesses as essential. I was happy to find out that in Arizona, legal services will remain essential, although they are not, according to the governor of Pennsylvania. But so I think the fact that our governor actually makes a pronouncement that certain types of services shall not be terminated is obviously even stronger than just saying they don't need to be closed. And so that addresses your question about potential liability directly as well.
Well, you know, I never want to shoot the messenger. I always because I always know a lot of people are believing what this guy is saying, and I'm in Arizona. I'm not in New York. I'm not in Italy. I'm not in other place. I'm not in Seattle. I mean, I'm in Arizona, and it's half the people I know think this is an overblown deal, and I'm trying to show them that this is not. Really, you're the only microbiologist on the planet. You got a PhD in microbiology. I have a DDS, but I've actually got mine on eBay along with an Eagle Scout and a black belt for $9.99. As a microbiologist, if I can't believe we still have to talk about this, but what would you say to dentists who are doctors who still are saying this is an overblown situation?
Howard, you know, that's really a difficult question. Look, my husband is a dentist. My uncle was a dentist. My two sons are dentists. I live with a bunch of dentists.
There's a special place for you in heaven. Just remember that.
And I totally understand. If until something like this strikes someone you know, or worse yet, someone in your own family who becomes seriously ill with it, it always seems far away. And I also absolutely get the fact that when income stops, but payroll continues, that you're not going to be getting a lot of sleep at night if you happen to be the one that pays the payroll. And even those who receive the payroll are concerned, is their check going to continue to come? And if not, when is it going to be cut off? And then what are they going to do? So you have all these contributing factors. But I'm going to talk for just a second about strictly the microbiology. First of all, I want you to know Ebola and MERS and COVID and SARS, all of these have been respiratory acute killers in your lifetime. Some of them you haven't worried about because Ebola was clear over in Africa, right? And you hear about it, but nobody really is worried about it here. MERS, that was also in another continent. However, there have been a number of these acute respiratory diseases, and I'm concerned about the COVID-19 because just last night, our local major newspaper in Utah announced that anyone 25 and over is now a target, and not just 60 and over, because the cases here in this state have frankly been pronounced in those much younger than 60. And so I think I don't know how, I just met with a bunch of dentists this morning, and they were talking about the fact that they couldn't buy the most effective masks and the most effective disinfectant that we have identified with our testing. And they said, if we can't get these products, what should we do? And my comment was self-isolate and don't treat your emergency patient, or go with the patient someplace where these essential products are being used and are there. Because you have to ask yourself, is this incident worth your life? And in healthcare, that becomes a very interesting question, because when we go into healthcare, I think most of the disciplines have some kind of an oath And if you're listening to the oath, essentially you have promised that the patient comes first. And that means that perhaps you are willing to sacrifice your health for a patient. And that's going to be an individual decision. I don't think anyone believes that a flu is going to kill them. In actuality, it kills thousands of people every single year. Every single year, thousands of people. And again, I come back to the beginning. Unless it happened to you, someone you know, someone in your family, it's like it didn't really happen. So I hope that answers your question a little
As
bit.
far as fear of catching the virus, it depends on the individual person. Like the COVID-19 made me actually get my first tattoo. I went in there yesterday, and right across my chest, I've got "Do not
I want to know what it
resuscitate."
says. What does your first tattoo say? No,
Do not resuscitate right across my chest. It's like, come
do
on,
not
dude.
resuscitate. Okay.
George, you're an old boot too, and you're not just George Tysowsky DDS. You have a master's in public health, and you've lived through all these SARS and H1N1s and H5, all these swine flus all for years. What is your combination of your master's in public health with your doctor of dental surgery? And I think you were around when Hurricane Agnes hit Benco. Weren't you?
Don't
Weren't you
admit
riding
anything.
your bike right by the event when it happened, George?
Well, it's a challenging time. We're all living through this together, and it's a significant factor. And I think, Howard, you mentioned it. There's been a number of tragedies in this world. I think what's challenging about this one, it's really taken us into uncharted territories. And being based in New York, although we're Western New York, where we're still seeing the significant factors that it has on personal challenges, families, and on the economic situation is overwhelming. I mean, from a corporate standpoint, we've hunkered down as far as focused on our employees. We're fortunate with 3,500 employees worldwide. We've only had 3 or 4 cases in our entire employee pool, but again, with very significant preventive factors. And we're still operating on a very limited basis to service those dentists who are operating for emergency reasons. Laboratories, we hear, are operating about 25-30% capacity. They've got 4 to 5 days of work on a limited basis. To some have 4 to 5 weeks still of big cases they're trying to complete. And then dentists are operating, as we said before, 25 to 30% are operational. Chuck may have a better feel for that directly, but and then servicing those that are doing emergencies. But we're trying to ride out the course, stabilize the field, and then we will all get through this. I mean, we've been through it a number of times. The question is, what's the afterlife? That's the unknown part right now. We've dealt with it with the HIV. We had infection control methods. I think when we got comfortable with it, we practiced it diligently, and then there's a relaxation period. And as Rella and Gordon have preached and published extensively on this topic, we all get comfortable and we get sloppy in certain situations down the line. So there'll be a quick rebound of a very controlled fashion of practice. The after effect won't be immediate. Nobody's going to wake up and say, hey, we're all clear now, let's go back to normal. It'll be a ramp up of prevention factors. Social distancing will be at a moderate basis, controlling of patient access to us all. It'll be a different life for us, and dentistry will go through that evolution just like we have in the past. And other factors that we have is to look at what will be the dental environment in the future. I mean, today we're reorganizing ourselves. We're trying to look at what is the business life and how is dentistry going to be practiced? How will it be socialized? What are dental meetings? What's dental education in the future? Do we have meetings like we had in Vancouver? I mean, you had a small epicenter there occur with a number of individuals who contracted it in those type of areas. Do we control it more? Do we consolidate? And how do we communicate as a dental profession in the future? So we will get through this. Nobody has a magic calendar to say this will be the end point. We're forecasting, and these are all guesses, mid-May, we would hope to be back to some operational capacity and normality of starting that back up in the atom. But the question is, what happens after that? How quickly do we ramp up? How quickly can we socialize? How quickly can patients come back? Are they going to be reluctant to come back? Are they going to be a waiting period of 6 months before testing the waters? Nobody knows that where we'll go. And that's, I think, the mystery question with this particular virus that has caught us totally off guard and unprepared and moving in a very rapid fashion.
Yeah, and what scares me is I'll remember, like I say, this is the fifth one I've lived through, 80, 87, 2000, 2008. And you remember it was 5 years ago this month when the smartest dental economist I know, Marco Vucicek, PhD, ADA chief economist, he wrote of lawyers, lattes, and dentists, where he showed post-recession 2009, 2011 after Lehman's Day that when the rest of the economy is back up, dentistry, lawyers, and lattes, we're still lagging, which kind of is scary because not only we got to go through this, we know that you don't need a Starbucks coffee and you don't need a lawyer and you don't need a cleaning if you don't have any groceries. I mean, the number one thing they won't walk away from is their smartphone and their car payment. I mean, they walk away from their house if they have no problem just getting in the car with their smartphone and driving away to their mom's house. So it's going to be extra scary that after this is all over, we're probably going to have lawyers, lattes, and dentists still slow to recover completely. Do you agree with that, George?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, again, it's very much unknown, but when we had the 2007, 2008 downturn, that was really a setback. There was the growth of the aesthetic revolution, or cosmetic dentistry was in a boom heyday at that time. That all dried up, but those dentists that focused on basic services, broken teeth, endo, single crowns, cavity control, whatever, they were busy. People have basic needs, and they came in for single tooth restorative dentistry. And I think that the elective procedures shrunk back at that time. So comprehensive implant reconstructions and other factors were put on hold. But basic dental services were in demand, and those dentists that can provide those services certainly did well during those times, and we tried to re-identify themselves. But if you were the cosmetic dentist down the street, you were hurting at that time if you weren't providing and reaching out to general dentistry and providing those basic services.
And by the way, I was always against those people. I was very outspoken. I remember at lecturing at an AACD convention where Dickerson was in the next room with LV. And I love Dickerson. I love him, and I love his brutal honesty. But he said, hey, if you don't do this cosmetic revolution, then you're going to end up being some Walmart dude like Howard next door. So if you want to be Walmart, leave my room and go see him. But then during the contraction, we lost about 80 dental offices in Phoenix, Arizona, and a handful of those guys were in my front room crying, and they lost their skill to do a root canal, an extraction, a partial, a denture. And I'm like, dude, you're a public health doctor, and dentists don't get that it's one of the specialties. I mean, dentists just cavalier say, well, I don't do extractions. Well, how would you like to break your leg and you go to the hospital and the ER room says, we don't do legs. We're sorry. We do arms and ears and eyes, but we just don't like legs. We don't do legs. There's other leg people, and you're a public health doctor. And when someone walks in a dental office and there's 150,000 locations and they got swelling, pain, fever, hurt, if you can't triage that situation, you need to hand over your dental license to a dental therapist who at least will try. I mean, she's ready to go for it. So yeah, the public health skills are imperative. Chuck, after the 2008, when Marco was writing that and the post-recession deal, you see dentistry at 30,000 feet. I mean, you see so much data, so many dental offices. What lessons did you learn from post-Lehman's Day that young dentists should be thinking about applying post-COVID-19?
Well, I definitely agree with you, Howard, that dentists should, in my opinion, try to make sure that all of the procedures in the practice are able to be performed. And sometimes the dirty little secret is dentists don't perform procedures because they're nervous to perform the procedures. They don't feel like they have the skill or the confidence to do them. So a patient will walk into the chair and will have a procedure that needs to be done, and the doctor doesn't feel he or she has the skills in order to do them. So I think part of it is making sure that you, as the dentist, have the skills and the support you need to get the procedures done, and then having the confidence to do them.
So fear, it's always fear with humans. They're just fear.
It's a little bit of fear, but sometimes you know what you can do and you know what you can't do. But basically, it's the thing that I like best about dentists is that dentists are very entrepreneurial, and dentists are very much focused on on growing their businesses and making sure that they take good care of their patients. So that's one of the things I really like about dentistry.
And Chuck, what do you think will be the long-term implant? Do you think we'll have a like say with the HIV, it forced universal precautions, which everybody had talked about for years, but dentists just didn't want to do them. What changes do you think this is going to force on dentistry?
Well, I want to build on something that Rella and George said before, because I think this case is different. So like you, Howard, I've been through 2 or 3 of these, whether it's AIDS or others. This is the first crisis in healthcare or infection control that I can remember where I think the practitioners are seeing themselves in some sort of danger. So if we think back to the AIDS issue back in the 80s, the issue was really more around cross-contamination than anything else. Oh my God, we need to make sure that we know how to make sure that one patient's bad germs don't infect another patient. But I don't ever remember on a broad scale a lot of dentists being nervous that they would catch the specific disease that we're talking about. I think COVID-19 really calls into question that we'll have dentists who, and I think this may be true, dentists maybe of your age group, Howard, or a little older than you, who say, you know, I'm not sure that I want to go back to dentistry because I'm in an age group where I'm more susceptible to catching this disease. And I feel like I'm in danger. Or your 65-year-old hygienist just decides that she doesn't want to go back to doing hygiene work because she doesn't want to put herself in danger. So for that reason, I do think that the net effect, the aftermath of the COVID-19 outbreak will have some bigger long-term effects on dentistry and how it's practiced, because the practitioners and team members will feel that things have to be done in order to protect their own health and safety.
Howard, can I say something?
Yes.
You know, I think that we're going to have to let patients know if our offices are state of the art in infection control. We're going to have to talk about it. We're going to have to show it. We have to be visible. I think that we're going to have to look at it as a profession at air purification. I think we're going to have to look as a profession at the validity of our infection control products. This has been a problem from the very beginning. Many of them look like infection control products, but do not function to actually deliver what they should deliver. And I think
hang on 1 second. Kyle, is there anything we can do with her sound? Is it just being closer to the mic? It sounds muffled though.
We're up as high as my sound will go.
Can you move the mic as close as you can? Did you just
Mike.
Well,
you even have a son named Mike. How do you not know where the mic is when you named your son Mikey? How is Mikey doing? Is he the smart one that went to Canada?
He's the smart one that went to Canada, but the one that's here in Utah, he's pretty smart too. He's got great hands.
Oh, I know, but he's probably wishing right now he was out in the wild of Canada, where you don't need to go to the store. Mikey could probably go out and hunt for dinner.
They've got their problems in Canada as well. He's totally shut down, Howard. But let me reiterate what I said, that honestly, in the wake of this crisis, I think in dentistry specifically, that we need to let patients know where our individual offices are in infection control. What do? We need to make our procedures visible and talk about them. I think all of dentistry needs to consider air filtration in their offices. And I also mentioned that we have a serious problem in medicine, dentistry, veterinary, nursing homes. The products that we're using, most, not many, not some, most do not meet the criteria that we think they should meet. We have certain expectations, and there is no one validating the claims of these products. Now, we have at our lab for years, but we've run alone and we're the only ones that are working with viruses in product evaluation. And this is a serious situation. The game changer for infection control products is human proteins. Did everyone hear that? The game changer in infection control products of all types are the human proteins. Those are the saliva, the blood, the nasal excretions, the clavicular fluid. These secretions that are protein-based literally neutralize all chemical disinfectants to varying degrees. We found a couple that will survive and right through a heavy protein load. But frankly, only 3. And then we have to talk about concentrations. We have face masks that clinicians wear that don't properly seal at the periphery. We have clinicians that wear the face masks under their nose and mouth. I mean, you know, what do we really?
I mean, but let's be honest. Before COVID-19, what percent of all the people in dentistry didn't even know what an N95 mask was?
I would say, Howard, honestly, unless they worked in construction in some areas or in chemicals, I would say 100%.
Yeah.
You know, and there's a real question about what this means. Look, the N tells us that the mask is not going to protect against aerosols that have oil in them, okay? The 95 says that particular mask has gone through some NIOSH specified tests where it will filter 95% of submicron particles. Here's the problem. The tests are performed by hired clinical laboratories that then send reports to the manufacturers. Those are sent to NIOSH, and for the disinfectants, they're sent to EPA or FDA, and no one validates the data. And there have been well-known in microbiology many, not a few, but many incidences where data have not been truthfully produced and yet have been submitted, and the products don't do what they're put on the market to do. And this is serious because clinicians move forth, they buy these products, they use them, and they don't know. And they have no way to know because the microorganisms are invisible, so they don't know really where they are, where they're going, or if they have effectively handled them. So we come back to a system in our federal government that was designed to actually validate these. And without wanting to get into politics, I'm going to name some names. But during the Reagan administration, the National Disinfectant Testing Lab was obliterated for budget reasons, and it has never been reinstated all these years later, and yet we now have a president that says the country's health is top priority. And I wonder if he even knows that we used to have a lab that validated all of these products. The manufacturer submitted those products, and in one lab, everything was tested and categorized and validated. That system is out the window.
Well, I don't want to point any fingers because of the 1918 influenza pandemic, known as the Spanish influenza, because Spain was the only country. I know it had nothing to do. Well, yeah, they didn't have an army. People didn't want to call it the Russian. They didn't want to call it after a country that had an army. But it was the biggest crime scene in the world, and when they solved it, it turned out to be went from a pig to a farmer in Kansas. So my great state of
right in the United States, didn't it, Howard?
Yeah.
That was the U.S.
Chuck, my question is to you: can I return all my N95 masks to Benco and get them credited towards the N100 mask?
The answer is, if you've got N95 masks, Howard, I want them. I will drive from Pennsylvania to your office today to pick them up. in general, what we can't get is N95 masks. That's been our big challenge the last few weeks. Our sales were minuscule of N95 masks before this whole event broke out. And now dentistry is standing behind, as we should, frontline healthcare workers who are fighting the COVID-19 crisis. And I think that's the way it should be. Going forward, I do agree with Rella that there's going to be an upgrade of personal protective equipment that we're looking at. I think that's the first thing we're going to see. The second thing we're going to see is more focus on the aerosols and the air quality in dental practices. And we are working very hard to source some filtration and air exchange systems from the medical side that we can bring over to dental that are affordable for dental offices to install. Something along the lines of an ultraviolet system that will kill the germs in the air. And the third thing we think we're going to see longer term is changes in the way that dental offices are designed. Although it certainly won't happen right away, I do expect, we on our side expect that the days of open bay operatories and just using a center island to separate rooms, open sterilization areas with a corridor, we think that those things are probably going to drift away as regulatory agencies start to look at dental offices in a similar way to the way they look at any hospital or healthcare environment. If you think about it, you would never be able to just walk by and see a sterilization center in a hospital because it's a closed environment. Nor would you see I can't think of any other healthcare environment where closed rooms is not the standard of care. So these are the kinds of things I think that we're going to see going forward. Again, it'll take a generation to get there, but those are the three areas that we've quickly identified as getting a lot of attention over the next few years.
And I also just want to make one thing, I'm really optimistic. Like Smiles Direct Club, that actually brought orthodontists and general dentists closer together. The orthodontists used to think maybe we were the competition. And when they saw Smiles Direct Club, they go, no, you're my homie. Come on, it's us against Smiles Direct. And a lot of dentists are very thinking about themselves, but dental, Chuck, you work with how many small family dental supplier manufacturers do you work with? Not just the big ones, Dentsply, 3M, all the Ivoclar, all those, but how many companies are struggling where you're almost worried, will they be able to supply you with dental supplies 30 days from now or 100 days from now?
Well, I don't think long term we're worried about dental companies being able to survive any more than we would be other sectors of the economy. I think as a society, we're going to decide to put the loan guarantees in place and the support to make sure that companies can make it going forward. On the other hand, though, I do think that there are some non-traditional, shall we say, supply chain vendors that I think, based on what Rella said, are going to have trouble going forward, and they should. I think one outcome of this whole crisis is that dentists are going to rely more on the more reliable, well-known brand names, the Bencos, the Shines, the Pattersons, because you know what you're getting. You can rely on those companies to supply products of high quality. There are a lot of people who think, well, I'm just going to go on Amazon and I'm going to order from some marketplace vendor that I've never heard of and just trust that what I'm getting is what I order. And in fact, I just think going forward, dentists are going to be more reluctant to do that as well. They should. If you're just going to go on Amazon as a consumer and order anything you want, there's very little danger to that. But to have healthcare professionals buy products that are FDA approved for their practices from some vendor that they've never heard of, they can't trust where it came from, how it's been handled, what the testing is behind it, whether the labeling is correct. I think that that's hopefully going to go away a little bit. So when it comes to our company and a company like Ivoclar, where George works, we believe that going forward, dependable supply chain issues are going to be super important.
So for the young kids, there's a lot of young kids who don't know what gray market is. If they're listening to this in dental school, or were you referring to gray market channels too?
I'm referring to gray market. I'm referring to any non-traditional and non-dependable supply chain.
But explain a gray market. I don't think the 6,500 kids coming out of school a Mayo Way know what gray market means.
Gray market basically refers to buying a product from a non-authorized source. So for example, Ivoclar makes some very, very good products, and they've identified a number of companies around the country that are authorized to sell the products. We at Benco, for example, are authorized to sell some Ivoclar products, but not all Ivoclar products. When dentists go out and buy Ivoclar products, we believe that they should buy them from Ivoclar authorized distributors. Those distributors are trained, the product they have is fresh, it is dependable, it is properly labeled, it is not counterfeit, it is what you see and what you order is what you get. And there are companies out there selling Ivoclar products, for example, that are not authorized distributors, and therefore you're not sure what you're getting. That's gray market.
And
And
then
so this is so important to understand.
And I just want to, before I turn this over to Tom Giacobbe, the editor of Dental Town for 20 years, I just want to, I have to ask one very controversial question. You said that you thought as a society we're going to come with bridge loans and supports, and Delta Dental of Washington just announced a bridge loan program for $10 million to dentists, and Iowa's Delta Dental did it. A lot of people are saying that the dental insurance industry, the whole health insurance is fragmented and wrong. Do you think that one of the biggest COVID-19 factors is going to be the reorganization of the dental industry, where there's already a lot of public health dentists calling for Medicare to cover dentistry, Medicare to cover teledentistry. But if the government's going to put out $2 trillion of loans to try to keep everybody afloat and come back together, do you think they're going to also try to restructure the country's insurance program?
So based on just the events of the last day or two, I would say probably the answer is zero, is not going to happen. And the evidence I would give you for that is look at the fighting that went on in Washington over the $2 trillion stimulus package that was just passed. I think most people would say that the Democrats tried to stop that legislation so they could get certain things reordered in the economy. You can agree with those proposed changes or not, but what I can think that we can all take away is that those changes basically did not go through from my observation, mostly because I don't think now is the time when as a society we're going to try to figure out how to make those kinds of substantial systemic changes to our systems. I do think now is the time where everybody's going to figure out how do we get just things back to the way they were before. So my bet would be no, I don't see that happening in dentistry.
Tom, did you want to bring questions in from our viewers?
Yes, Howard, I would love to. We've got just a boatload of questions. I'm going to do my best to work around the panel here, but I want to start with some of the HR legal questions for John. With the guarantee of sick pay and the extended family medical leave, a lot of dentists are very confused as to A, whether they're required to pay those monies to their employees, B, if they lay off the employees, do they avoid that obligation? And are they getting any credit for pay that they've given their employees so far since they were advised to shut down?
Well, there's a lot of questions, and I'll sort of answer them as directly as I can because each one has a definite answer. So let's start with the last one first. The guidance that came out from the Department of Labor last night made very clear that any leave, paid leave that employers, and this would include dentists, have provided to workers up to April 1st, when the Families First Act becomes effective next Wednesday, will not act as a credit toward what they are obligated to do under the act when it becomes effective. So nothing that an employer has done out of its generosity up to this point is going to offset the new obligations that become effective with the law next week. That's clear. Okay. In terms of laying off workers and avoiding obligations, yes. I mean, if the sad and unfortunate reality is that if employers lay off workers between now and April 1, they don't have any obligations with respect to those what will become former workers. The law is not in effect right now. It's like it doesn't exist. It doesn't become law until next Wednesday, and so anything that an employer does between now and then can't be impacted by the law in any way. In terms of compliance, you know, there are two types of leaves that are being required under this new act. There's the expanded paid family medical leave component of it, and then there's the new sick leave component of it. Under the expanded paid family medical leave component, and both of these apply to employers with less than 500 workers, dentists, anybody else must provide leave to workers who need to care for kids who are at home because they've been displaced from school or childcare because of the virus. That's all that family medical leave relates to. So what the dentists who are listening need to keep in mind is that this is not an expansive acceleration of family medical leave. It's very targeted, it's very limited. It doesn't have to do with illness, symptoms, or anything else. All it relates to is parents who have kids at home who can't work or work remotely because they've been displaced. Okay. There are two notable exceptions for this FMLA expansion that are particularly appropriate for dentists to consider. One is the healthcare provider exemption. Under the Family Medical Leave Act, as it's expanded, dentists, for example, may unilaterally opt not to offer these benefits to healthcare providers in their practices. So you have to look to the FMLA for the definition of a healthcare provider in order to determine who among your staff may be one of these individuals who doesn't need to be afforded this new family medical leave. And unfortunately, the definition of healthcare provider in the CFR is very lengthy, so we can't sort of paraphrase it here on the phone, but I can give you the site if anybody's listening and wants to look it up. It's in 29 CFR 825.125, 29 825.125. And if you're curious about whether or not your hygienist or your dental assistant or someone else in your office may be exempt from this family and medical leave expansion requirement, look at the CFR, and then if you have a question, just get in touch with me and we'll try to work through it. There's also the
CFR means
Code of Federal Regulations.
Okay.
It's the code that in which the government posts and publishes regulations that surround a law. So the Family's First Act needs a lot of gloss and a lot of explanation and a lot of guidance, and those regulations, which will come out slowly, will answer a lot of the questions and provide a lot of the context for how you are to comply with the law once it comes out. All right. But this CFR has existed forever because the Family and Medical Leave Act has been around for quite some time. You just apply this definition of healthcare provider to determine now whether or not people in your office may be exempt from the new leave requirement. The other exemption that's applicable to you folks is the exemption for employers of less than 50 workers, because a lot of the dental practices who may be tuning in have less than 50 people working for them. And what the Family's First Act provides is that if you are an employer with fewer than 50 workers who can show that complying with this obligation would be very disruptive to your business operations, you may be exempt from providing the leave altogether. The unfortunate piece of this is that even after the DOL regulations, or guidance rather, came out last night, we still don't have a clear path or explanation about how smaller employers are to secure this exemption. There's no process yet that has been defined that you would go through to secure it. So I would say to you, as a dental practice, a small one, if you are fairly risk tolerant, you could take the position that you will be able to secure the exemption. You can prove that it would be disruptive or harmful to your business. You have less than 50 workers, and consequently, you don't have to provide the benefits. That's a position you could take at this point. But one overriding observation that everybody needs to keep in mind for all this is that all of these benefits, whether you can find an exemption or not, whether you have to pay workers for these new leave aspects or not, it's all going to be reimbursed by the government. Everything you pay out for these leave benefits will be reimbursed. And initially, the way you were going to have to get those reimbursements was going to be through an application for tax credit at the end of each calendar quarter. So in other words, you were having to front or float the money that you were paying out, which could be harmful to a practice, right? Now, just within the past week or 10 days, the IRS has made clear that you won't even have to float or front the money. What you will do is you will simply offset your employer portion of payroll withholding by the amounts that you have to pay out to workers to satisfy these new obligations. So the reimbursement for businesses now will be rather immediate. You won't have to wait to get a credit back and so on. So although these leave obligations sound really significant and very costly, you do have to keep in mind that you will be reimbursed, and you will be reimbursed rather immediately for everything that you spent. It's very important.
We have hygienists and associate dentists that are employees of practices, and they are paid on a commission based on their productivity. How would we calculate their payment under this act?
Well, the paid family medical leave, which we've just discussed, is 12 weeks of leave, the first 2 weeks of which are unpaid, the remaining 10 weeks of which are paid. That is based, those 10 weeks are based on an employee's full regular rate, but up to a cap of $200 per day.
Okay.
So if you do the math, the entire expenditure for an employee under the family and medical leave piece, which is just childcare related now,
right,
would be $10,000, $200 per day for 10 weeks. To answer your question, Tom, a salaried worker, that's easy because you know what that person's regular rate is. An hourly worker, full-time worker, that's easy. If you have an employee who is incentive-based, has incentive-based compensation like commissions and so on, you take an average over a period of time. If the person's been employed for 6 months, you take a 6 month average, you look back and you calculate a regular rate to determine what each of those hours is going to be paid at. My guess is that your hygienists and associate dentists will, even at the regular rate, when you average it, including commissions and everything, will be well over the $200 per day cap. So what's going to happen as a practical matter is, for the most part, this cap is going to be the default payment. The same is true. The same is true for the sick leave component. We haven't discussed that yet, but aside from the family and medical leave component dealing with childcare, there is a new entitlement to 2 weeks of paid sick leave, which is symptom and quarantine based. In other words, unlike the family and medical leave piece, which is based on childcare, the paid sick time, 2 weeks, is based on one of 6 criteria that include quarantining, symptoms, caring for people with quarantine, and so on. It's more, if you will, virus oriented directly.
Right.
Those benefits are paid at different rates. If you are quarantined or experiencing symptoms and you take your 2 weeks of sick leave, you are paid at your full rate, which is capped at $511 per day. If you are caring for a child, caring for an individual, if you meet that set of criteria, you are paid at 2/3 your regular rate of pay, which is capped at $200, just like the family and medical leave. So the maximum exposure for an employer for either one of those is going to be $5,110 per worker for 10 days at the 2 weeks at the higher rate, $2,000 per worker for 2/3 at the lower rate, depending on which of the criteria triggers the leave. You would calculate the regular rate the same way for part-time workers and commissioned workers that you originally asked about.
Okay, awesome. Art, there's a lot of dentists out there that are very cash strapped. They're in a crisis, cash is king. What are your recommendations to your clients for managing the payroll obligations they have, rent, all of the overhead expenses that continue in spite of the lack of patients?
Well, Tom, this is a question that I have been answering nonstop on the telephone with my clients for the past 8 or 9 days. And what I am telling, I'll just tell you what I've been telling each one of my clients. Every one of my clients I have contacted, I've gotten them on the phone, and I basically start out like this. I say, folks, I don't have a playbook for my business has no revenues and I have a bunch of fixed expenses. So what we need to do is we need to build a war chest. We need cash is king, just like you said. I'm inviting my clients to make a 30, 60, and 90-day plan, and I even put a spreadsheet together to send to them with kind of a, what do we think is going to come in? What do we think we're going to spend? So everybody, it's all hands on deck. So first of all, know that virtually all of the dental lenders out there who with many of our listeners out there have loans with, have very, very aggressively and graciously offered loan deferment options to where dentists are able to call them up and defer their payments on their loans for anywhere between 60 and 120 days. And every dentist who has any loan of any type with any financial institution should call that institution and ask for a loan deferment. The second thing I'm telling my clients is that if you have lines of credit that you haven't accessed, the banking system right now is in very good shape. The government is pumping $350 billion into small business loans. And I'll chat about the 7A program that's going to be coming up here in a second. But if you have a line of credit, you need to build a war chest. You need to get as much money into your accounts as possible, because quite frankly, none of us on this panel and nobody listening, we don't know how long this is going to last. We don't know how long we're going to have to be continuing to pay overhead. Now, obviously, the biggest overhead that you have in your practice are your employees. And that's a very personal decision from practice to practice that you have to make. I will tell you that a large number of the doctors that I've been talking to have either laid off or furloughed, or for whatever term you want to use, they're not paying their employees and they're encouraging them to file for unemployment. That's a very personal conversation. And I want to be very clear. Like I say, I've gotten a lot of calls on labor issues. Please give John a call. Give your labor attorneys a call. Very, very important. The other thing, excess lines of credits, loan deferrals. The other thing that you can do is, if you have qualified retirement plans, you can go out and borrow up to $50,000 of your qualified retirement, the amount that is vested in your retirement plan, or half your vested interest. So if you and your spouse are on a retirement plan, and many of our clients have that, you can borrow up to $100,000. You're borrowing the money from yourself, and those have to be generally repaid over 5 years, at least quarterly, and at a rate of interest that's usually about 4 to 5%. Also, if you have cash value life insurance, that's another place that you could tap money. So what I think everybody has to do is they have to sit down with a spreadsheet and figure out, plan for the worst, hope for the best, which means figure out how much you're going to have coming in. Now, how much is going to be coming in? You will get some insurance payments for procedures that are covered by insurance that you've done. We don't know how quickly the insurance companies are going to continue to pay dentists. You will have some patients that will pay you. I would not count on that because, again, we all know what's going on in this country. A lot of people are not working, but you will get some. So if you were able to estimate that maybe you're going to get $10,000 or $20,000 in over the next couple of weeks or months, factor that in. Factor in how you're going to pay your employees. And again, I have a lawyer on the phone here, John. Do not stop paying your rent, because if you stop paying your rent, you are under a legal contract. And I'm not a licensed attorney, but you're under a legal contract that bad things could happen to you. So talk to your landlord about a possible rental deferral. Maybe you have a landlord who's been your friend for 30 years. Maybe it's the dentist you bought the practice from. Maybe they say, yeah, I'm going to help you out here, but get it in writing. The other thing that we're seeing is a lot of the credit card companies are offering 0 payments for a month or two, deferring payments. That's something to take a look at. The other thing that President Trump put into play on March 20th is there's deferment opportunities for student loans. And you have the ability to defer your student loan payments for potentially up to 60 days. And there's some rules. I could spend an hour on going into that. But that's something that you should be looking into for doctors if you have student loan payments. So anything that you can do to cut or defer your overhead and get money into your accounts, because folks, if the banking system has a real problem, if this goes south, cash is king. Curtail your personal expense spending. That's so critical.
So,
now,
Arthur, just to be clear, are you saying stop paying your alimony? Did I hear that right?
Well,
Suspend all alimony payments.
Howard, I've been married for 35 years, and the two most important words I know in the English language are yes, dear. So, again, I'm not a licensed attorney, and I wouldn't give that advice. But I
John,
think
is that what you recommend? John, stop paying alimony today.
Judith
Well-
will kill
Take
you.
away.
Judith will kill you, Howard. This will be the
Howard,
last
I'm on-
podcast you do.
Howard,
I'm
I'm
so
on
glad I
day,
went to my own webinar today. I learned the most important information.
Yes.
I'm on day 8 of working at home for the first time in 35 years, and I'm still married. Fingers are crossed.
Nice. Gordon, I'd like to get your
That's the best
perspective
advice.
on where you think we're headed.
I'm sorry?
I wanted to ask Gordon to share his thoughts on where he thinks we're headed.
It's completely unknown. However, I've watched over the last while as this thing first came on, and everybody said, forget it. It's no big deal. It'll go away very fast. Practitioners. And then subsequently, even a few days later, they would see, we can't get any supplies. By the way, Rella, way back, like 25 years ago, identified the products that should have been used and made a video that has been an absolute classic. It sold more videos than any other video we've ever made, out of thousands. And guess what? I resurrected it again today and did a little video just before this one, saying we have a classic video that should have been the overall premium video right from that time on, but it was kind of put aside because dentists did not accept the fact that we were dealing with all these pathogens, and they didn't want to wear gloves, they didn't want to do various things. Rella spelled that out many, many, many years ago, and as she said very clearly, a lot of the products that are on the market right now do not meet those standards, including some of those, and I'm going to probably get a little political here for a minute, some of those are now CDC recommendations that they have come in with products that are not working adequately. The ethyl alcohols that she identified many, many years ago, they give or take 60, 70%, are the ones that were working. Some of the other things that came on, like these wipes that you wipe on the surface of a countertop or whatever, are useless. Toilet water is better. We've got things out there that have never been tested, as she said. And Dennis poo-pooed that for way, way, way too long. Well, let's go back to my original start. And that is subsequently they started to recognize, wow, the public is buying up everything inside. I can't get Clorox, which, by the way, diluted as it is probably almost useless. And CDC's got to wake up on that one. There are a lot of things out there that are really contrary to known principles. And the public is now getting a hold of it. You can't buy Lysol, even though Lysol is too low in alcohol content now. We're seeing some unbelievable things have happened. Well, then what happened? Subsequently, they decided, I'm running out of money. People aren't coming. People are not coming to the dentist. And some of the states actually said, don't go to the dentist. It made dentistry look bad because dentistry then looked like somehow we were less effective with our infection control, which we're not. It's just that we have all the aerosols that Rella's explained very, very well. Where are they now? We're kind of in a unknown area. Our governor is saying we're still in an urgent area, ready to go into a level area, but who knows when and where. New York's not ready, Seattle's not ready, many of the countries are not ready. He's ready to, the president, if you heard that yesterday, is ready to identify some areas that could be going back to work. I'm sure he must be sitting in a very hot seat because he's got to blend it between the economy and the health of the people. If you're living in the plains in Iowa, you're not worried about very much about the virus. Right. If you're living in New York City, you are. So if he identifies these areas that are not problematic and turns them loose, that'll help. People are recovering. As you know, there have been about 300,000 that have been identified with the problem, and 100,000 of them have already gotten over it. We think. There are some saying that they still are able to blow out the virus for up to 2 weeks after they've had it and been negative. So we don't know where we're going that way. But if you consider what I just said, with 100,000 healed, they're not involved with the virus anymore. They're not passing it on as they were before. So little by little by little, we're going to have fewer people able to contract the virus. And
Okay.
we're going to see an overall reduction in this thing. When it will come, Trump says for some, as you heard last night, Easter. Our governor says June. Others are saying put on into the end of the year. So we've got to be ready to fund our employees. We have 50 in our little education group. We just met with them right before this meeting, telling them where we would go. I sincerely hope one of the fallouts of this thing will be that dentists will have more interest in saving up resources. But that's where I see we're going. We're going to level soon.
Very good. Chuck, when we get back, looking ahead, I realize we're not ready to get back to work, but as we get back to operating as a supplier, how long do you think it's going to be before some of the items that are in short supply now make their way back into stock? The N95 mask is a good example.
So we're predicting that's going to be weeks until we get some supply, and then months until it totally fills in. So what we've done in our organization is we've worked very hard to ration the products that we have. Now we've been out of N95 masks for a while because we never sold that many, but we actually have a pretty good supply of level 3 masks, which are not quite as good as N95s, but they're not bad. And we will work very hard as a supplier, and I suspect Shine Patterson and other Darby as well, to make sure that when we get supply in, we're going to make sure that we don't allow hoarding, because the real issue here is, in addition to the supply chain, is there's a hoarding mentality that's really come in. So as suppliers, I think we have a responsibility to make sure that if we only have 100 boxes of masks, they don't end up in one Dr. Farran's office, for example. Not that we're talking about anyone on this call, but Howard, you can only have 2 boxes this week.
That's right.
And we got some criticism around that, as I'm sure our competitors did as well. But rationing is really the rational way to make sure that we don't end up with hoarding. And
yeah.
what
we're doing is we're storing less potato chips so we can make more room for masks.
Is there?
Yes, thank you, Howard. We all appreciate that. Thank you.
Are there any other protective items that you're seeing supply issues with? Gloves, for example.
Gloves have actually been pretty good. We don't see a big change in gloves. The gloves that we use in dentistry now seem to be adequate enough. And gloves come from Malaysia, not from China. A lot of people don't realize that. So there really has been no supply chain issues around gloves. Where we're going to see issues, we think, is in masks, of course, as we upgrade to better masks. We are going to see some issues around some gowns and disposable gowns, because as dentistry uses more of those products, we just need to get more of them through the supply chain. And then finally, we are going to see an increase in surface disinfectants, we think. We believe the supply chain will be able to adapt quickly on that one. The biggest issue, we think, is going to be the N95 mask. And the other thing just to mention is, and again, this is more Rella's area, but 2 issues I think that we have to consider. Number one is an N95 mask is uncomfortable to work in all day. So I do believe there's a lot of practitioners who are listening today who say, I need N95 masks. They may get them in and find out that they make it harder to breathe. That's why they work the way they do. So as an industry, we're gonna have to figure that out. The second one is going back decades, we've all been focused on universal protocols, meaning that we take the same amount of protocols for every patient. We treat it in the days of thinking back to the 90s, we treat every patient like that patient might have HIV. I'm not sure that we're gonna have that going forward. And I would lean on Rella to answer the question is, do we foresee a day when we might have 2 or 3 different levels of infection control protocol, where we say, if a patient comes in who's likely maybe to have a respiratory issue, that's a patient we pull out an N95 mask for. or that's a patient where we do something slightly different. But for the rank and file patients that we have, perhaps our current level of infection control is adequate.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And George, I wanted to touch on industry point of view from your perspective. There are a lot of little mom and pop dental companies out there that sell, all kinds of gadgets. In the wake of this pandemic, do you think that a number of those companies are not going to make it through? Do you think the big companies are going to get bigger and we're going to see fewer little companies by the time this is all over?
Oh, sure, Tom. Happy to address it. If I could just come back to Chuck's comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll do it in two phases, but infection control is so critical. And obviously, when we had the HIV crisis, we had a swing to mandatory OSHA protection and different barrier garments, et cetera. As we got comfortable, the reality is that dentistry in general became comfortable and practiced more lax infection control practices. If you walk in a dental office, you would see people without barrier garments. They're practicing with a golf shirt and khakis and maybe have gloves and a mask on or whatever. This is going to push us back to a high standard of infection control. And so we'll have a rebound effect. It'll be the infection control protection garments that we have with each clinician and each staff member. The second point is we'll have more regimented infection control disinfecting protocols between patients. So depending on your volume of operatories, there'll be more of a turnaround time of cleaning out the operatories before the next patient comes in. So there'll be added expense and effort on all those areas, but we definitely will have a rebound towards the more conservative and more protective area based on this pandemic that's occurring right now. So that'll be a significant shift back to where it should be practiced accordingly, and will be regulated by the government for that matter. On the separate parts, the thing is, in general, industry in general is becoming so regulated today. It's a factor. We have quality agreements, we have quality management systems, ISO regulations, et cetera. The fact is, this is for the betterment of dentistry and provides better quality products. And Chuck had indicated before about gray market, where people buy from unknown suppliers and you don't know what chain they came from, you don't know what the storage conditions are of those products. We will have more regulations, that's a fact. And it's not to discriminate against a smaller entity for that matter, but just the regulations and the cost of doing business is just going to increase. It'll be harder and harder in those elements to survive in this type of environment, and that's just a fact of business integration. So it's not a good thing because you have a lot of entrepreneurial individuals who've created specialty products and provided them, but the cost of doing business is just going to get tougher and tougher and bigger to us to provide a regulated stream of quality products.
Wonderful. John, I want to come back to you with a couple of legal questions. One has to do with the fearful employee, an employee that says, I'm not comfortable working right now because I'm afraid I'm going to catch this thing. Or, maybe down the road a little bit when things are approaching normal again, an employee that maybe comes and says, I'm not comfortable working unless you provide me with X and Y and Z. And, where does an employer stand when it comes to those sorts of things?
Well, good questions. The generic fearful employment question, I think, is one that's pretty easy to answer, and that is if an employee just says what you just sort of paraphrased, which is, I don't feel comfortable, I'm afraid, I don't want to come into work, that's really not his or her option. The employer has the right, even at this point, until a business is officially closed by pronouncement or order, to insist that the worker come into work. And if the worker doesn't want to, then the employer takes whatever disciplinary measure it wants to in order to address that, whatever you would want to call it, insubordination or refusal. And it sounds harsh under the current circumstances, but that's just the legal reality of it. At least in an at-will employment state where the employment relationship is really terminable by either party, employer or employee, at any time with or without notice. California, for example, state laws may creep into this equation and change things a little bit, because every single state law is not the same when it comes to something like this. But generally speaking, I think what I described is probably the right answer in most cases. Now, let's take the second question where this sort of dies down or it relaxes, and there are workers who are out with permission, and then take the hypothetical worker you described. One of them says, I'm not comfortable coming back unless you provide me with certain things. Now, if, for example, the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, applies to that employer, and if that hypothetical worker has some sort of condition that would make him or her more susceptible or cause that person to be more concerned about returning to the work environment under the circumstances, that business may have an obligation to accommodate that worker. And they would have to go through the standard accommodation analysis under the ADA to determine if the person does have a bona fide disability that would result in an employer obligation to accommodate, and then what those accommodations might be. So the answer to your second question may be somewhat hard to answer, except on a case-by-case basis, depending on whether or not the worker has some sort of condition that might impact the analysis.
Okay. Art, I wanted to ask you about the SBA loans. I've heard a lot of people talking about getting these, I don't know if they call them SBA disaster loans, or can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So when this started about a week and a half ago, the SBA set up they've always had a disaster relief program, but they set up a disaster relief program where everybody was applying, and the loans were up to $2 million. They were 3.75% payable over as much as 30 years with no prepayment penalty. And everybody has, and my advice up until now has been, you apply for these loans. And as you can just well imagine, that the SBA has been beyond inundated by this.
Right.
Well, with this new CARES Act, and again, we don't have a law yet. It's going to be voted on, we believe. It could be tonight, tomorrow. We will probably have law hopefully by Thursday or Friday. But what's in the proposed bill, and I'm just going to read something real quick, is this is part of the Paycheck Protection Program. It would provide 8 weeks of cash flow assistance through 100% federally guaranteed loans to small businesses who maintain their payrolls through this emergency. So what the government's going to do is the government is going to basically farm this out to the biggest banks in the country. I talked to the number 2 guy at the biggest dental lender in the country, and he said that the government has come to them and said, you need to help us. So you're going to be able to go to your bank that has an SBA program, and you're going to be able to apply for loans. These loans will have, and I'm just giving you some general terms because we don't have the law yet. I want to be very careful to say this is not law. That these loans will have up to 1 year deferred payments. They're going to waive all the SBA fees, and as long as you use these funds to keep people employed, pay your payroll, pay your rent, pay your loan payments, etc., you will be what's in the thing right now is 8 weeks of this is going to be forgiven. So the government is jumping in. Now, as everybody knows, when a new law is passed, like when the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act got passed in December of 2018, it went through very quickly, and it took months and months to interpret it. So we're going to have to interpret what's in this 619-page bill. But I suspect that it is the #1 priority of this government to keep small businesses open as much as possible, keep them on their feet, and provide them with opportunities to get money that potentially they might not have to pay back to keep people working. That's the whole key. So what you need to do out there is read what you can, talk to your professional advisors, and because we're going to be on top of what these programs are going to be. Okay. I'm talking to the biggest dental lender in the country, to their West Coast reps at 3:30 today, and I'm going to be getting some additional information. I'll report, Howard, to you and to the rest of the folks as to what's going on. Again, we're getting information through our ADCPA members on it's changing hourly. But
I just hope they keep all the beauty salons open, or it's going to get ugly out there.
Beauty salons are not going to help me. I can tell you that for sure. But it's but there is going to be help out there. And doctors, for now, again, my advice is hoard cash. Cash is king. We need to get you through a couple of weeks. The government is not going to pay for everything, but they are going to help you get through this crisis. And failure is not an option here, folks.
Right.
You're going to get through it. It is not an option.
Rella, I'd like to get your comment on two items that a number of people have asked. One, what's your opinion of pre-rinsing, having patients do a pre-rinse with something prior to an appointment, and whether that would help in this situation? And question two is, can you name at least 2 or 3 surface disinfectants that you do like?
Well, all right, let's start with the second question because it's easier to answer. We have the answer.
Sure.
It is not a question of what I like. It's a question of what can pass the test.
Yep.
And back about 31 years ago, we actually published this paper in JADA, 39 different brand names, all the different active ingredients that were sold for disinfectants at that time were tested in the absence and then in the presence of several different human proteins. 2 of the 5 organisms that we used for testing were poliovirus, 1, the actual Mahoney strain that caused polio in this country back in the 40s and 50s, and the tuberculosis bacteria. And we found that those 2 kind of separated the disinfectants into don't work, do work. And then we found when we added fresh human whole blood, by fresh, I mean that we draw this blood just prior to the test from a human. And essentially, it's used with the poliovirus, which is a non-envelope, very small virus, one of the very hardest to kill with chemicals. There are several. We chose that one because it was a human pathogen, and it was known to people. And we found that the blood was just an absolute game changer. So many things that we had thought we could count on, we found we couldn't. But in searching the literature, we found that the industries have known this from the early days in the mid-1800s when phenolics were king. Phenolics are particularly susceptible to bioburden. And so we then devised a special quick test using the polio virus, and in the presence of, frankly, it's just 10% blood. That means 90% of what is added to this test system is water, not really even yet what the clinicians face, and yet practically all of the disinfectants fail that. We found and reported in that paper published in JADA in October of 1989, the formulation had to be a high ethyl alcohol formulation, not just high ethyl alcohol. In other words, you can't be like the cowboy movies where you just pour the gin on the countertop and use it. No,
right.
There are some factors with it that are part of these formulations, 3 of them that are critical. First of all, surfactant, so it spreads. Secondly, an additive that will delay the evaporation. And thirdly, and most important, would be certain trace chemicals that allow the ethyl alcohol to penetrate the bioburden and actually inactivate or kill. We call it inactivate with virology, but to a clinician, it's kill the virus within the bioburden. And that meant that we had to seek after the test, we had to seek our test virus within the test system to see if it was still viable, and in most it was. But these high ethyl alcohol products can only be very minimum at 70%, which would be a volume measurement. It's going to be about 52% by weight. Usually
So what would some of those be?
the best that we've been able to find came on the market about 4 years ago, and it is called BioSurf Bag in a Box. It comes out of Canada, a small company called Micrilium, and there are several things that make it the best. First of all, by volume, it has 84% ethyl alcohol and about 2%, 0.2% chlorhexidine.
Okay.
And other trace ingredients. Those trace ingredients are key to this. You can't just go formulate your own. We've tried that.
Right.
But also the dispensing of it. It is dispensed like a more inexpensive wine. It is sealed in a biodegradable heavy plastic with like a spigot to dispense it. So as you dispense it, the plastic container collapses on itself, and so
Okay.
it has.
Hey, Tom,
No
can I
evaporation.
ask a question real quick, if you don't mind?
Yeah, fire away.
When you're talking about cash is king and save cash, and this might be 3, 6, 4 weeks. I mean, you guys do business around the world. I mean, Ivoclar's in Liechtenstein. I mean, it's right around Germany, Switzerland, France, Italy. Chuck, you're buying suppliers from China and all these things like that. Bill Gates even looks at this and says this is going to be, 3 to 4 months. Do you think, or are you seeing any evidence that this is a 90-day pandemic? I mean, from all the suppliers around the world you're talking to, what are you basing on when you think dentists can actually go back to work?
I'll bow to George on this one, and then, I'm sure he's got a better worldwide perspective than I do.
Yeah, well, we can customize it down, but we're all looking for a light at the end of the journey here, and we follow our China operation that really went into a shutdown. So it took about 10 weeks, Howard. They basically closed for a solid 8 weeks, then we started reopening, and the office is back and running after 10 weeks. So that was a model of a really complete shutdown, focus on internal operations, and commerce is starting to come back. So we spoke to our general manager a few days ago. It's the first days they're actually having lunches in sidewalk cafes. I saw pictures of people walking up the Great Wall last night in different areas. So
and what were those 10 weeks? What were those dates? What would you say? December 15 to March 15, and what 10 weeks?
Roughly, it started just before the outbreak started just before the new year and then went through. So roughly in that category. So
would you say America's 10 weeks would be St. Patrick's Day plus 10 weeks?
We started calculating from about a week ago. So we were hoping, and this is no magic wand here as far as predicting, but we're hoping for 10 weeks and watching the model. And we hope that model can be replicated. Several factors on that. I mean, China really shut down. I mean, they shut down. And here we have trickles of epicenters, New York, controls. We have restrictions, essential definitions of business. So we're shut down, but we're not shut down. So the question is, with our restrictive preventive factors, will that 10 weeks hold for us in operations? But in China, the offices are starting to open, the businesses are opening, but the question is, are the customers starting to reorder and come back into play, and are the dentists practicing and the labs back in operation? They're crawling back. So we hope that model can be duplicated here and we can get back to a normal, well, I shouldn't say normal, because what will be the definition of normal is unknown, but to some semblance of normalicity as far as of continuing with our business operations. Chuck, from your perspective.
Good, Chuck.
So our perspective is similar to George, but maybe slightly different. We figure this thing started around a week or two ago. We're hoping that we're out of it by mid-May. which would be a little bit less than the 10 weeks that George talked about. But I would add two things to what George said. So really nobody knows, but the two things are, number one, we're a very big country, and I think we're probably going to be looking at different dates for different areas. New York certainly is going through this thing first. And I think we're naive if we think that the pandemic is going to go through a place like Utah within 10 weeks from when it started in New York. So my suspicion is that everywhere is going to have to go through their own 10 weeks or 8-week period of time. Second one is, I think we're all kind of under the impression that dentistry will align with the overall economy. For example, at some point, restaurants will reopen and movie theaters will reopen. That may or may not be true, and it's entirely possible that dentistry is somewhat aligned, but not totally aligned. An example that I can give everybody is in the state of Pennsylvania, the Department of Health issued an order on Monday that for all intents and purposes shut down dentistry in the state of Pennsylvania for the foreseeable future. Now, the Pennsylvania Dental Association is negotiating, I think, with the Department of Health to get dentistry reopened, to get the regulations softened. But I think we also have to be aware that dentistry may not reopen exactly the same time as the bowling alley or the restaurants reopen. It may be a little bit longer in certain areas as we work through the issues that are particular to dentistry.
Yeah. Howard, just to add one more point to that, Tom and Howard, is that, you know, again, this control of commerce, we're a nation of fluidity and movement. You know, flights are still going out of New York to Florida, and the Florida governor just issued a restriction that if you fly from New York to Florida, you're supposed to self-quarantine once you land in Florida for 14 days. That's not actually practical, but the issue is, what is the fluidity? What's going to be the expansion of this pandemic in our country? And as Chuck said, there will be different regions that will be affected more, and others will recover on a different time frame. And then one last point of levity, we're talking about the offices being closed in Pennsylvania. Just so you know that in New York State, liquor stores and wine stores are classified as essential business, so they're still open for business and happy.
Well, they say
are in Arizona.
Tom, could I, one more question, Tom, sorry to interrupt. You know, a positive way to look at that, it's a gift of time. I mean, so many people just want to stop their life, but I mean, my gosh, there's worse things that happen than you have to stay home for a month. And, you know, there's all these projects you haven't finished. And I went around the house to just look at all the projects I hadn't finished, and I had to finish like 7 different bottles of Jameson, but I finished all those projects. But I hope dentists use this gift of time, because it is a gift. Not many times are you forced to not go to the office for a month or two. There's worse things that happen.
That's right.
I think on a lot of on that also, a lot of people now we're trying to emphasize reinvest in yourself. So if you're down, you know, are you taking CE? Are you educating yourself? Are you picking up other skills? How are you utilizing this to do things that you never have the time to? So come out of this, make yourself stronger and better. I know we're doing our own employee re-education, certifications, expansion of services for the dental community. We're trying to partner with our key partners and doing online training, education, CE, webinars, whatever it may be to come out stronger, obviously.
Tom, may I say a word about that? As all of you know, we're heavily involved with education constantly, and we're doing this coming week, the end of the week, we're doing a 12-hour course, totally virtual. We have sent to the individuals who had previously registered for it back when there was not the virus. We've sent a bag of equipment. We've sent 100 pages of handouts, and so it'll be a pretty well normal course, other than I won't be there. I'll be standing in front of them. So we're doing webinars. We're doing the Indiana State Dental Association very shortly, all digital. So I see continuing education changing, and probably eventually that will be a part of what we do in CE. Some won't want to come anymore to a large meeting. However, in polling the profession, we found that many do want to come to meetings. So I think we're going to see a continued change into both virtual and conventional, and ways to use this time. No problem.
Tom,
well, I've got you there. Can I ask Rella to name those 2 disinfecting agents? We had BioSurf, you said was the first one. What was the
Yes.
second one that you were going to name? Can you tell us the name again?
The second one is, the second two are available in local grocery stores. One would be Lysol spray.
Okay.
I want to point out that the California VOC laws back in about 2007 caused that product to lose a lot of its potency because they dictated the reduction of 21% of its ethyl alcohol, its major active ingredient. So it has a much slower kill now. They reduced the kill rate from 30 seconds to almost 9 minutes.
Okay.
The second product, of course, is regular Clorox. Now, there are a number of different Lysols and Cloroxes out there, so you have to be a label reader. Both
Yep.
of these products, at least in Utah, are virtually off the shelf. I mean, they're just gone. The paper towels, the toilet paper, and those two disinfectants seem to be the items that are gone. And one of the questions that came up with this morning group that put together the research writing was, okay, if I can't get any of those three,
Right.
and I have an emergency patient, what do I do? There's a default, and that is that you can liberally use barriers by covering as much of your surfaces as possible with various plastics and papers. The word of caution there is to watch yourself extremely carefully when you remove the barriers so you
Right.
don't infect yourself. You would want to roll them within themselves so that always the infected part is away from you. And of course, in our opinion, those would go into hazardous waste.
Yep.
In many offices, the hazardous waste bags are maybe 6 inches by 9 inches.
Yeah.
So that becomes a problem for them. But and then the question came up, if we don't want to do that, now what do we do? And honestly, the answer to that is to gather up your emergency patient and take them to a place where these situations are in current use. So you don't really have to refer the patient if you can take your own patient to where you have those advantages
Very
present.
good.
Tom, can I ask one quick question before we're off the phone? Because this is, and the question is really for John. John, I think we've all talked about, and this is a great example, the proliferation of webinars over the last few weeks, and I foresee that's going to happen a lot as we all get in this education phase. Can you talk to this issue around what if I'm a dentist and I've furloughed my employees? Can I ask them to watch this kind of a webinar? Can you talk a little bit about the legality so that we make sure that our dentists don't get into any kind of legal trouble with wage and hour laws around educational programs while the employees may have different statuses in the offices?
Right. So there's a distinction between a furlough and everything else, really, because a layoff, a termination, layoffs are true separations, meaning the employment relationship is ended. Typically, when you use the word furlough, you're talking about just telling somebody you remain in the employment, but you're just not going to have any scheduled hours. You're not going to perform any work. Typically, a furlough employee for those reasons continues to enjoy all of their employment-related benefits, health insurance, and so on, provided the premiums are paid. If that worker remains in the employment and you haven't separated them through an actual layoff, then when you ask them and they agree to participate in the types of things you're talking about, that probably is going to be compensable time. And so for an hourly employee, that individual is going to be compensated by the hour. You may agree to an adjusted hourly rate under the circumstances for what they're doing. It may be different and lower than what they're typically paid, but it's compensable time. For a salaried employee, keep in mind that if a salaried employee performs any work at all during the course of one work week, then that employee is entitled to his or her compensation for that week. So you may want to convert salaried employees to hourly employees in the situation and then adjust rates and pay them by the hour for what they do. On the other hand, if you just suggest to a furloughed worker or even a laid-off worker, here's a list of a dozen or 20 different CEs or webinars, that would be great. You want to do that, it's entirely up to you. That's a different story. But if you're going to strongly encourage it or require it, you're probably going to be looking at compensable time.
So we all should just be careful about that as we go forward to make sure we don't get into some sort of trouble, because there are going to be a lot of dental employees out there who will have somewhat of a different relationship with their offices, and we just want to be careful we don't nobody gets in any trouble over this with wage and hour issues.
That's a great point.
Chuck, a lot of them are scared that, like say when they graduate in 2 months, it's going to be hard to find a job. Do you think do you have any advice to 6,500 new graduates in 2 months about looking for employment?
Well, find the right place to work and really check out and make sure it's a place when you graduate that you can learn something from. I really think the most important dental job when you first graduate is a place where the money, of course, is important because everyone has loans and has to make money, but where's a place where you can really learn to be a dentist? And I think, Howard, even you had to go to a place first to learn to be a dentist, and that may not have been dental school, but dental school, then learn to go to a place to learn to be a dentist, and we all know what that means. And then after that, try to figure out where's the best place to pursue your career. And I think
Awesome.
I'm very bullish on the future of dentistry, and we have all of our family's resources tied up in the future of dentistry, and I can't think of a better profession to serve as we go forward together. So I'm very excited about where we're going together.
Great comments.
Wonderful. Thanks for that, Chuck. I'd like to turn to Howard as we're running out of time. I want to be respectful of everybody's time here. But Howard, a number of people in the audience have asked, what are you doing? What's going on with your practice? And I'd like to get just your closing thoughts before we end the webinar.
Well, thanks, Tom, for having this today. This was fantastic. I learned a lot myself. We closed down our dental office on St. Patrick's Day, which was the day we started Dental Town on St. Patrick's Day in 1999. And being an Irishman, it was just it's interesting. But this too shall pass. I mean, imagine waking up and you found out that Pearl Harbor was bombed and you had to go to war. I mean, this isn't that bad. Like I say, this is the 5th shock I've lived through, and it's different. There's a lot of uncharted waters, but this too will pass. So you have this big gift of time, you have forced vacation, and what you ought to do is try to be real productive with it. I mean, what are those books you haven't read? Franchises are so successful because they have a headquarters that doesn't have to see patients and make hamburgers and fries and Cokes like all the retail stores. A franchise can just sit there and work on your SOPs, your standard operating procedures. So please use this time to do these big, long projects that you never had time to do, so that when this too shall pass, like everything else passes, you're going to come out of this better and stronger and wiser. And if you ever bet against Homo sapien, I mean, it's crazy. I mean, there's 8 billion humans. There's very few species that reach that number. Humans live to be 100. There's only a dozen species that made it to 100, and those are turtles, tortoises, or deep water ocean fish that are protected from the sun. Humans check that off. I mean, we live on every territory. We're more tenacious than a cockroach and an ant and a scorpion combined. So the last thing that's going to happen to Homo sapien, who has 300,000 newborn babies a day, this is a tremendous herd of 8 billion sapiens that have been living on this surface for 50,000 years. So it's going to go on. This too shall pass. So just make good use of your time. And I'd like to thank the panel, because this was certainly 2 hours of good use of their time listening to you fine folks. Thank you for coming on the show today.
Awesome. I'd like to say thank you as well on behalf of Dental Town for everybody on our panel that participated. I want to thank the audience for your time and attention. We certainly hope to have more webinars like this as this situation continues to develop. Wish you all the best. Everybody stay well, stay healthy, and we'll end with a little music as we always do. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.